Did you ever notice that we give more power to the words than we do to the ideas that they convey? There are just some words we are not comfortable saying out loud or not allowed to say in polite society. Yet we can call them by their initial, identify them. The F word, is not fun or friendship. And everyone knows what we mean. But why isn't that as scandalous as saying the word itself? Well, this is a dilemma I feared I might come up against when I decided to do a service on the history of the H word. Hades, the underworld. Oh, I'll just say it, hell. The history of hell, there. I'm not wishing anybody be sent there if there is a there. I find it fascinating, though, that stories and beliefs about it have never been the same throughout human history. I hope you find it interesting as well, and useful as you consider your place in the cosmos and its place in the stream of organized faiths. Good morning and welcome. This is Annie Furster, minister here at First Jefferson Unitarian Universalist Church in Fort Worth, Texas. We continue to stream our services on Facebook and YouTube, planning our reopening for the first Sunday after Labor Day, September 12th. This summer, we've been making repairs on the building where we had water damage after the freeze in February ruptured a water pipe, and making the grounds and building ready for our return after more than 18 months of closure. We will continue to stream our services for those of you not ready to come back in person or who live too far away to join us. But for now, let us begin our worship this morning as Misha Bresnev plays our prelude. It looks like Misha chose music on a higher plane than my subject. It's going to be a nice balance for the service. Anne Slater tells us that the Persian poet Rumi challenges us with his words, "Come, come whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving. Ours is no caravan of despair. Come, yet again come." And we come from rich heritages of liturgy and pomp, or we come from burning legacies of angry gods and threats of hellfire. We come just as we are. We come with exuberant and joyful hearts, eager to witness to others. We come bereft of the goodness of life, wondering, hesitant. And we come just as we are. We come in the bloom of youth, ready to explore new truths. We come ready to sit apart from our children and be nourished for an hour. We come with gray in our hair and experiences to share. We come just as we are. We come to the place we never knew before was home. We come to the place that has been home for most of our lives. We come just as we are to join our brothers and sisters as members of one family in this beloved home, our hands and our hearts outstretched. Come, yet again, come. Our chalice lighting this morning was written by Leslie Pohl Cosbo. We light our chalice this morning with a flame of fire, spark of the universe that warmed our ancestral hearth, agent of life and death, symbol of truth and freedom. Alongside its glow, we strive to understand ourselves and our earthly home. Please join us in singing our opening hymn this morning, number 38 in the gray hymnal. The words will be on your screen. Morning has broken. David Bindi is our song leader this morning.
Morning has broken like the first morning. Blackbird has spoken like the first bird. Praise for the singing, praise for the morning, praise for them springing fresh from the word. Sweet the rain's new fall, sunlit from heaven, like the first dew fall on the first grass. Praise for the sweetness of the wet garden, sprung in completeness where God's feet pass. Mine is the sunlight, mine is the morning, born of the one light Eden saw play. Praise with elation, praise every morning, God's recreation of the new day.
We say our covenant together every Sunday morning to remind us of who we are and how we are together. Please say it with me. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest of truth is our sacrament, and service is our prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve others in community to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with creation. Thus do we covenant with one another. My assumption is that the vast majority of Unitarian Universalists do not consider hell a physical location, nor worry about being assigned there for all eternity. So I imagine that you question why I would want to talk to you about it. Well, I was surprised to learn that 60% of the country's population does consider it real and have concerns for their eternal souls. I would like to understand the thinking that went into defining hell over the millennia and its varied religious uses over the centuries. It isn't just one thing with one agreed upon purpose or structure. I'm also fascinated with the belief that so many considered their existence on this earth to be a hell as compared to what they looked forward to after their death. So the two questions I had for myself were these. Why was it considered necessary in the first place by so many religious leaders and so many faiths? And why, in this enlightened and scientific age, doesn't it go away? Consider these along with me this morning, won't you? In the meantime, I have a story for all ages. It's called A Visit to the Afterlife. I don't know who wrote it. I don't recall where I first heard this story. It might be from one of the better-known stories about heaven and hell, like that of Dante or Milton, or it might just have been written as a lesson story. So I thought I'd just retell it here in my own words as I remember its effect on me when I first heard it. I have heard stories about heaven, a place where good people go when they die, where everyone is happy every day and no one feels sad or angry. But I've also heard stories about hell, a place where bad people go when they die and experience pain and suffering forever and ever. I know in other churches I would be required to talk about both of these places every Sunday. But as a Unitarian Universalist minister, the choice is mine. I like to talk about things I know firsthand, so I wondered if I might visit either one of these places, and I contacted my travel agent to find out. The answer was yes, if my passport was up to date. I made the usual arrangements online and said I would like to visit hell first, and then heaven, to see what all the talk was about. I booked a round-trip plan. I arrived in hell early in the morning. Now in Texas, that's usually the coolest part of the day, but it was already hot in hell. I was shown to an upper balcony, thank goodness, since I was just a visitor, and assured it was much hotter down there below me. I looked over the railing, and much to my surprise, there were hundreds of tables set with beautiful dishes, and delicious food was spread all about. Yet all I heard was moaning. Look closer, my guide instructed me. I did. And I saw that each diner had a wooden spoon with a very long handle, but no one was eating. Look at their arms, my guide suggested. And then I noticed that none of the people in hell could bend their elbows. They struggled to dip the long spoons into the delicious food, but they could not bend their arms to bring it to their mouths. Oh, they moaned, such delicious smells, and I'm so hungry. But no one could eat. Oh, I'd seen enough. I wouldn't want to live there. I caught the next plane to heaven. I arrived in heaven in the mid-afternoon, expecting hot sunshine like we have here in July. But it was surprisingly cool, and there was a lovely breeze. And again, I was taken to a balcony where I could observe. And again, to my surprise, this is what I saw. There were hundreds of tables set with beautiful dishes, and delicious food was spread all about. And each diner at the table had a wooden spoon with a very long handle. And they too could not bend their elbows. Yet everyone was smiling and talking and laughing happily. I looked closer and saw the reason why. Instead of struggling to get the food into their own mouths, each person was feeding a person next to them, extending their arm and the long spoon, able to reach people seated 3 chairs down if they wished. Here, try this peach cobbler, they were saying. Oh, delicious, came the reply. Thank you, let me give you a sample of the crispy fried chicken. And the response, thank you, I'd love some. Well, I came back home thinking of the strange similarity between heaven and hell and the different way that people handled the problem of the dining arrangements. Well, just as here on earth, the difference wasn't one of location or circumstance. It was the way people treated one another. I knew I would be able to tell you with confidence from my own experience to treat one another as you would be treated. Would you like a cookie? Would you like a bite of fruit? I like that story, don't you? Well, to begin with, the Jewish Bible had no hell as we think of it today. There was Sheol, a dark and dreary place underground where all dead souls went. But there was no further punishment that took place there. It was more of a storage place than retribution. Yet every religion throughout history has had some place for the souls of those who have left Earth's paradise. And in many of them, there are separate places for those who have behaved well in life and those who have behaved badly. The gods of ancient religions inhabited the tops of mountains or lived above the sphere that was the sky. So it was only logical that those who didn't live with the gods after death were to go to a place beneath the earth. Religions are notorious borrowers, gathering pieces from the faiths that preceded them, either because they worked well for those believers or they were already in practice in the region and with a few slight innovations could be transferred to the new religion without much trouble. I mean, think of Christmas being celebrated as Jesus' birthday in December because the local pagans already celebrated Saturnalia then, instead of having Christmas in March or August, which are more likely dates for his birth if the story about the shepherds is to be believed. So as you look at the stories of hell, also known as Ananka or Hades or the Great Below, you see similarities from one faith to another. But the stories about the gods and their counterparts also follow human history. So as the world turns, so also do the stories of heaven and hell. The very struggles of the Catholic Church greatly influence the beliefs and the lessons about hell. Now, I knew some of this when I decided last month to do more research and titled this Sunday's topic, The History of Hell. So imagine my surprise when I went online and found out there was an entire book by that name, and that any research I might have done was already done much better by its author, Alice K. Turner. My intent this morning is not to do a book report on Turner's tome, because you can read it for yourself if you're interested. I'm going to lend my copy to the church library. My intent this morning is rather to examine those historical changes in its landscape, methodologies, and purposes, and to wonder how it affected believers and non-believers alike, to try to determine what its literary existence at least might mean for Unitarian Universalists. Remember, our own histories also follow the histories of the Catholic Church, the Protestant Reformation, the Enlightenment, the Scientific Revolution, and the psychological teachings of Freud and those who followed him. There is an entire chapter on universalism and universal salvation in Turner's book. And if you don't think any of it is of any importance to you, remember this, as I said earlier, 60% of those questioned today believe in a literal existence of hell. And if we ignore local religions or world religions and their variety of beliefs, we are in danger of isolating ourselves from others and losing any influence we might have for doing good in the world. Now, Zoroastrianism was one of the earliest influences on religions that followed. Zoroaster, or Zarathustra as he's sometimes called, founded the religion in ancient Iran or Afghanistan. Dates are uncertain and guesses about his life vary all the way from 2,000 years to 400 years before the Common Era. According to Turner, who places him about 700 BCE in Babylon, Zoroastrianism had an enormous influence directly and indirectly on the history of Christianity and specifically of hell. It was based on the early Vedic faith from which Hinduism and Buddhism also developed, but instead of relying on a pantheon of gods, Zoroaster taught a dualistic religion. The divine force of good, or the wise Lord, fought against the Lord of lies who dwells in the darkness of hell under the earth, sending out demons or devils to torment the world. Law, order, and light in this faith oppose darkness, filth, and death. Their conflict is the history of the world, and the object of their conflict is the very soul of man. Well, influences differed from faith to faith, but each had its elements in common. First, hell, or whatever it was called there, was a separate kingdom with a ruler, much like a king or a queen, who made the rules and kept order. And the ruler had subjects to do his or her bidding, followers who sometimes went out into the world above to tempt possible converts and bring back those who succumbed to their evil ways. Second, in the geography of the netherworld, there were rivers to cross to get there, mountains to climb, guides to lead the way, and horrible beasts with great teeth to terrify the new arrivals. And there was not only fire in these hells, but areas of extreme cold. And the third commonality, the stories of these regions were often told by people who had visited there and returned to earth, much like our story for all ages today. Their visits were often mere curiosity, but some went to try to bring someone back who was wrongly sent there or kidnapped by the demons. The demons in the stories seemed to work on a quota system and were always looking for new victims. In medieval Christianity, Jesus was believed to have traveled to hell to harrow it of wrongly accused innocents and to bring them back with him to heaven. This was a time of hope for Christians based on the belief that one could win release from hell through divine intervention or human prayer. But other tales were not so positive. Let's start there when I return for my second response. But for now, I'd like to give you a generosity report for this week. Summer is often a slow time for income from pledges or rentals, and for the past 2 months, spending at First Jefferson has exceeded income. So if you have any outstanding pledge, this is a good time to get caught up if you can. And if you think of the money you might have thrown into the offering plate during a live service, you might want to add a little extra to your check. And thank you for considering this. Before we return to my responses, I have a reading from The History of Hell by Alice Turner. She said, I wonder why it was so easy to convince early Christians they might end up in hell. Alice Turner explains that ancient Judaism and early Christianity both believed that bodies are corruptible and the material composing them impermanent, but souls, they believed, remain immortal forever. Coming forth from the most rarefied ether, they are trapped in the prison house of the body, as if drawn down by one of nature's spells. But once freed from the bonds of the flesh by death, they rejoice and they soar aloft. For the good souls there waits a home beyond the ocean, a place troubled by neither rain nor snow nor heat, but refreshed by the zephyr that blows ever gentle from the ocean. But bad souls are consigned to a darksome, stormy abyss, full of punishments, while the good are sent to dwell on the island of the blessed. The church tells these tales firstly because they believe souls to be immortal, but secondly, in the hope of encouraging virtue and discouraging vice. Let's pause here a moment to sing another hymn, number 17 in the gray hymnal, Every Night and Every Morn. Even our own music tells a similar story. This piece from William Blake and Ralph Vaughan Williams speaks of those immortal souls and their opposing experiences of both pain and delight.
Every night and every morn, some to misery are born. Every morn and every night, some are born to sweet delight. Joy and woe are woven fine, clothing for the soul divine. Under every grief and pine runs a joy with silken twine. It is right, it should be so. We were made for joy and woe. And when this we rightly know, safely through the world we go.
Well, how do you suppose hell found its way into Christianity? The ancient Greeks had much to say about it, and Plato was its main biographer. But they saw it more as a place of correction, eventual forgiveness, and a final relocation of the soul to a better place. Now, the Romans, whose rule was juxtaposed with early Christian history, were themselves not great myth makers, but because of the way they spread their influence over many years and many lands, tended to bring people traveling from one belief system into another, where ideas mated, gave birth to new ideas, and transformed the stories that carried these ideas forth. This cross-fertilization not only kept the idea of hell alive around the world, but helped it grow into a land that anyone would recognize and could describe. But it was the poets, not the politicians or the priests, who made the existence of hell so real in the minds of people. As Turner explains, Virgil's is the first thoroughly graphic description of hell and one of the best. Though all the images in it were current and general to the era, vivid art has a way of fixing general ideas into quite specific shapes. Virgil's impact was enormous, not only on later poets and storytellers like Dante, who would invoke him as a guide and mentor, and who himself forever changed hell's map, but on the men who hammered together the early guidelines for Christian cosmology: Clement of Alexandria, Origen, Tertullian, and especially Augustine, who quoted Virgil frequently. Now, we must remember that early Christianity was created not by Jesus himself or even his disciples. The first writings we know as biblical texts were created years after Jesus' death. The first by Paul, who had never met him but claims to have seen the risen Jesus, and created all of his stories from that belief that the soul can continue beyond this earthly prison. Of the gospel writers who wrote more than 50 to 100 years later, we cannot be sure any of the authors knew Jesus personally as they claimed. And of these, only Matthew seems caught up in proving the existence of hell and its purpose. Now, Revelations, which is sometimes pointed to as describing hell, was, as we know now, originally written about corrupt Roman rulers, who were many, and its oblique references were meant to keep those rulers unaware that the writings and warnings were about them, lest they punish the authors who were only trying to tell the world of their corrupt rule. Some of Matthew's stories talk about souls who had repented and changed their evil ways being finally in the bosom of Abraham. Well, this in itself was strange because original versions of Christian heaven did not allow Jews beyond its gates. It was Matthew who had Jesus descend into hell between Good Friday and Easter Sunday to harrow those souls who might be wrongly placed there. The source is vague, but believers looked it up and expanded on it years later, and it helped to explain Abraham's existence in heaven, where his job was to comfort those newly arrived from hell. But very quickly, a more exciting story began to circulate when this version was introduced. In it, Jesus descended to the underworld as a militant savior on a mission to rescue the souls of the just. There are many references to the descent in early Christian writing, but the most complete and influential account is in the Gospel of Nicodemus from the 5th century. Now, technically, Jesus harrows not hell, but the limbo of the patriarchs, presented as a dark underground prison administered by Hades. That's from the Greek tradition, with Satan from the Hebrew tradition as its worldly agent. The harrowing was vitally important to the Christian image in its portrait of a virile, capable Jesus, not the one suffering on the cross or preaching to the poor, but battling demons, rescuing prisoners, righting the wrongs, and issuing orders like a triumphant warrior prince. For many people, the story of the great rescue and triumph over death may have been the most attractive and comforting part of that new religion. Early Christians were millennialists, believing that Jesus would return in 1,000 years to create heaven on earth and issue final judgment on those who would belong and those who wouldn't. And when the second coming didn't happen, a new story had to be created for the last judgment and new questions asked of its timing and its purpose. Would all souls sleep until Jesus came again? Or would the saints be rewarded and sinners be punished until that time? Would sinners then possibly still face eternal punishment? Since Christianity was an apocalyptic religion, the whole point of which rested on death and salvation through resurrection, the negative as well as the positive side of the hereafter was of considerable interest. Who would be saved and who would be damned became subjects of obsessive speculation. The richest period in the history of hell, according to Turner, is the millennium that followed the fall of Rome, the middle period between the classical world and the one that began with the Renaissance, or rebirth of the classical approach to learning. All the foundations of hell were already in place when Rome fell. But what we might call the general landscaping of the project was vastly elaborated during the Middle Ages from the 5th to the 15th century. This was a time when religious questions were not about reality, but deep arguments about how many angels could dance on the head of a pin and whether or not food consumed during a lifetime would be a part of the body at resurrection. The vernacular sermon was developed fairly early as a way of communicating with parishioners, increasingly baffled by the mysteries of the Latin Mass, Turner explains. In a village or small town, that weekly sermon might be the chief, if maybe even the only entertainment for the populace. Hellfire sermons drew crowds for complex reasons and have continued to do so almost until the present. It was the Dark Ages, the earliest part of the Middle Ages, that gave the church its greatest power. The collapse of Rome, of a unified civil power, together with the loss of the state-supported system of schools and universities, gave the church, the only large collective body that remained, an opportunity to take charge. And largely because of that vision, administrative capability, and practical common sense of a remarkable pope, Gregory the Great, who lived from 540 to 605 in the Common Era, it moved quickly into a leadership position. And much later, during the Reformation, when Protestant churches preached against the corruption of the Catholic priests, believers continued to hold on to the idea of hell. Even the Enlightenment, which changed many concerns into positive beliefs about our lives, failed to destroy the power of hell. Even the scientific revolution was unable to unseat it completely. What was its strange power? Let's hold on to that question for a minute. Right now, I'd like to share with you a communion of names and milestones, things that are going on in this congregation, the stories that live among us. I've heard that Connie Nolan's husband, Dan, had a surgical procedure last week, but he is recovering nicely from that. Jo Burnham had a reaction to new medication after a surgical procedure that she had a couple of weeks ago, but she has stopped taking the medicine and is also on the mend. We're happy to hear those two stories that might have ended differently but had happy endings. And we hold in our minds, in our thoughts, any other stories that live in this community until we can see one another face to face once again. Let us take a moment to share a silence, to meditate on the stories that live in this community of which we are a part. We hold on to hell, wrote the Reverend Robert R. Walsh, the author of Stone Blessings, because when we discard it, we glimpse through the clearing smoke a God who is too complicated for us. Another Unitarian Universalist minister, the Reverend Deanna Vandiver, said, "Throughout time, our Unitarian Universalist faith tradition has held a thread of clarity. How we relate to each other creates the conditions of hell or heaven here on earth. We may not know or agree about what lies beyond this life, but it's our conviction that our actions and our inactions have consequences for the web of all existence. While fascinating and mysterious, we do not place our hopes for salvation in what happens after death. We find our salvation here on earth." Excuse me. We find our salvation here on earth, showing up for each other with mercy, respect, and compassion. How are we relating to our neighbors, our friends? As a people of faith, we are called to a love that is bold, to love beyond our skill and through our fear with courage and compassion. As a faithful collective, we are called to offer sanctuary, refuge, and comfort to everyone afflicted by the systems of oppression in this world. As faithful individuals, we are called to relationships of care and accountability. It makes a difference in the quality of this world when people with access to privilege and power give voice to a vision of collective liberation and name the obstacles within and without that limit us. Can we choose to live courageously, a people of faith, a people so bold? Can we faithfully challenge evil in the world and the sins of society that have become internalized within our beings? Our faith does not require that we be unafraid, only that we do not lead with fear or make our decisions from a place of fear. Our presence matters. How we relate to each other creates the conditions of hell or heaven here on earth. May we remember and affirm that we are all in this together, friends. We are all in this together. Now, I agree with both of these writers, but how did we get here? The Unitarians were not particularly concerned with questions of hell. They dismissed them for their own work on this planet during their lifetimes. They sought the answers to what creates goodness, not what destroys evil, and named education, love, courage, community, respect, and compassion. But the Universalists stopped to ask why people could believe that a loving God would allow such punishment and to try to destroy the beliefs about eternal damnation. A God, they said, who created us in love would not destroy his children, but would nurture them, for we could not love a God who thought otherwise. They believed that this loving God of theirs would not damn anyone to eternal suffering, and they preached the doctrine of universal salvation. That's how they got that name. Now, this was a direct challenge to the writings and beliefs of many Protestant faiths, and more specifically, the writings of John Calvin. One of the first to speak out publicly against hell was an English preacher named James Relly in the mid-18th century. One of his converts was John Murray, whose name you might be more familiar with. Murray was driven from England in order to stay out of debtor's prison and came to the United States believing he would not preach anymore, but find a more profitable career. But preach he did, and instantly became a huge success with many followers, earning him the name of the father of Universalism in America. They did continue to believe in hell, but not as a place of eternal torment, rather as a stopover for correction and forgiveness on their way to heaven, where all would eventually retire. Later Universalists did argue about how long other sinners might stay in hell, those who, unlike themselves, sinned more and probably needed more correction and more forgiveness than they did. But scholarly theologians on both sides argued about whether hell was even needed, since Jesus had died to save humankind, or whether the idea of universal salvation was just humanism in disguise that would lead to a disbelief in God and the blasphemy and sinning that would follow. Always discussions. We've talked before how our current beliefs have come from those classical arguments. I would love to have had the time to take you through the poetic influences on hell, the writings of Dante and Milton and some lesser-known writers who changed minds or at least created interesting discussions. And through the graphic and frightening work of artists who tried to capture the fear of fire and brimstone preaching on their canvases. I hope if you are not familiar with them, you take the time one day to seek them out. You will be amazed at how many of their words and images are part of our conversation and beliefs today. But I hope you enjoyed this little tour today, and if one day in anger you find yourself condemning some enemy to the netherworld, you at least have a clearer understanding in your mind of where you are sending them. Turner concludes her amazing study of the subject with these words: hell will probably continue to fade from religious teaching, especially as research into the near-death experience continues. But as a flexible metaphor, it is far too valuable to lose, though it will surely continue to change, as it has so frequently and remarkably since Mesopotamian days. Our closing hymn this morning is number 1008 in our teal hymnal, When Our Heart is in a Holy Place. Let us consider that we have learned our lessons from the stories of hell, and that we are in a better place, a holy place, when we look at how we might help a weary and imperfect world in which we reside.
When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we trust the wisdom in each of us, every color, every creed and kind, and we see our faces in each other's eyes, then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we tell our stories from deep inside, and we listen with a loving mind, and we hear our voices in each other's words, then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we share the silence of sacred space, and the God of our heart stirs within, and we feel the power of each other's faith, when our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place.
Thank you, David and Misha. Our chalice has burned this morning as a light from the past, from our history, from today, and we can extinguish it now because we take it with us, each of us, in our hearts. and our minds. Our benediction this morning is from the father of Universalism, John Murray. And he said these words, "Go out into the highways and the byways. Give the people something of your new vision. May you possess a small light, but uncover it. Let it shine. Use it in order to bring more light and understanding to the hearts of men and women. Give them not hell, but hope and courage. Preach the kindness and everlasting love of God, whatever that word means to you. So may it be in all our lives."